And tonight we're going to talk about speech and language disorders. This is one of my favorites. So let's see. Can y'all see my PowerPoint? It says chapter 7. We good? Okay. I like this chapter because I get to talk about two little boys with speech disorders. Well, here's one. On the left is Wesley. He's my oldest grandson, and this has been a few years ago, but he had a pretty bad speech disorder when he was little, and actually received speech services in a couple of school districts. He had a speech and a language disorder, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along. And you all may have had articulation disorders yourselves when you were little, or have a brother or sister that did, or know kids that did. Almost everybody knows somebody who has some speech difficulties as they're growing up. That's different from a language disorder, and we'll talk about that. And hopefully by the time we're finished in the next hour or so, you'll have a clear understanding of the difference between speech and language issues and what the differences are. There are actually 4 different types of disorders that fall under this umbrella of communication disorders, and that in the Texas public schools is called a speech impairment. And it actually includes 4 different kinds of things that we'll talk about as we go along tonight. So here's the definition of a speech or language impairment. It's a communication disorder such as stuttering, impaired articulation, a language impairment, or a voice impairment, which adversely affects a child's educational performance. Now, that's the key part there at the end, that it has to be something that adversely affects the child's educational performance. So it's got to impair them enough that it impedes their learning. So there are 4 different types of communication disorders, as I said just a minute ago, and here they are on your screen right now. We've got articulation, language, voice, and fluency disorders. And we'll go into each one of those in some detail, but I think on your next test that you'll take, test 2, which is coming, let's see, this will be, this is on test 2. You'll have, and that's coming up just in the next few days. I'll go ahead and open it. I think before the weekend. We'll have maybe a few days this week and a couple of days into next week to work on this test. We may even talk about that. Those of you who are tuned in, we'll talk about that. And when is it? In fact, let's just stop for a second and talk about that. And I'll get y'all's input on that. We need to have test 2, which covers chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay. And what do y'all want to do? When do you want me to open it, and how long do you need? What do you think? I'll take some feedback here. Anybody want to give me any feedback, or do you just want me to make up the rules on?
I can just say for me personally, the only feedback is lately the test for all my classes, it's either been the same day and the same week. And it has been challenging, but I've been making it work. And it's also been the issue of the window. It's been the same time too. So I'm either staying up really late for yours and then waking up really early for my other class, or I'm just swapping it around and just cutting the day in half. So that's probably my input on it. I don't know about everyone else.
Okay, so for your other classes, when's your window? Is it like coming up week and into next week?
Yeah, it's Friday, and he's only giving us the day.
Okay. I always give you more than just one day.
Yeah.
So I would probably give you like the whole weekend, or, like Saturday, Sunday, and Monday and Tuesday, or something like that. So you could pick a couple of, a day or two that you would have a choice. Anybody else have any feedback for me? Okay. Destiny, if I gave you Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, would that work?
Yes, that would work perfectly because I'm actually going on my first plane trip this weekend as well. So
Are
I'll
you?
have my laptop.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, then why don't we just say that I'll open it Saturday and
Okay.
have it open from Saturday through Tuesday. So people that have the weekend free
Yes.
can work on it over the weekend, and people that don't have the weekend free can work on it Monday or Tuesday. And it'll be the
Yes,
same
that
format as the last test, multiple choice. I can't remember if it's 20 or 25. I think it's 25 questions. 20, yeah, it's 25 questions, 4 points apiece each. And so for a total of 100 points. Okay.
thank you so much.
Okay. So we'll make it Saturday through Tuesday. Must be done by Tuesday. I think you have an hour or something like that to get it done. Maybe, I think maybe it's 90 minutes, something like that. To finish it. And this next one is all multiple choice. The last one, I think, had one kind of a little short essay at the bottom, a short answer question where you had to write what those barriers were to collaboration. And this next one doesn't have any of those. It's all short. It's either true, false, or multiple choice. So you'll get your feedback immediately on it, whether, what your grade is. Okay, so that's coming up, test 2. And this chapter is part of that. And I think one of the questions, is like this right here. What are the 4 types of communication disorders? So, you've got to know what these are. I'm preaching to the choir here because you all are certainly watching the webinar because you're attending the webinar. But I think there are lots of folks who aren't even watching the webinar, and then they're not doing such a great job on the test because they're not getting a lot of the information. They're not reading the chapters. It's obvious from some of the work that people are doing on their reflections that they're not reading the chapters because there's just a lack of connection on some of the questions. And you cannot just wing your way through the whole class and never look at a webinar and never read the book. It won't work. And so obviously y'all are the ones who are watching the webinar, you're attending the webinar, which is more than most people. So if you know people who are trying to skate through this one without ever watching the webinar or reading the textbook at all, they're gonna get a bad grade or fail a class that really is not that difficult. I was talking to a friend today who's a teacher in one of the more coveted districts here in the Metroplex. She works in Mansfield, and I was telling her that we had a couple of students in this class who this class or the other class that's we've got 2 classes that are 2 sections of this same class. And I said, there's several students who would live in the Metroplex and would like to probably work in your district, but if you can't pass this class, then you're not going to get accepted to teacher ed, or you're not going to move forward in your schooling career, and you're certainly not going to get a job in a high ranking district like Mansfield or any of those what I would consider appealing suburban districts that are going to pay you a good salary and have a good working environment. So, but y'all all are doing the right things. But if you've got friends who aren't, just maybe give them a heads up on that. So these 4 types of communication disorders are articulation, language, voice, and fluency. So let's look at each one in a little more detail. Here are a few of the building blocks of communication disorders. And some of you may know some of these building blocks already. And if not, from maybe your past English classes, if not, these are important things to know that work together both in oral language and in written language. So phonology is that study of speech sounds. When you break language down into the intricate pieces of language, the actual sounds that you use to make oral language. Morphology are the rules that govern the use of those minimally significant units of meaning. So like the ing sound that you put on words to make it a verb, or an action word, or the S or the ES that you put onto a word to make it a plural, or things like that. Those small units that that you use to change the meaning of words. Syntax is grammar, sentence structure, and the language rules that we have. And it's been so interesting to me as I've been reading some of the reflection writings that many of our students are doing in these sections of this class. I'm astounded at a lot of college students who don't know grammar and sentence structure and the basic language rules for writing a couple of good paragraphs. It's going to be hard to be a teacher if you can't write a couple of good paragraphs yourself. And even if you're not going to be an English teacher, you've got to be able to communicate with other educators within your field. Let's say you're not going to be an educator. Let's say you're going to be maybe a child life specialist, or you're going to be some professional within the kinesiology field. You've still got to be able to communicate in writing in whatever field you're going to specialize at the post secondary level. You've got to be able to communicate in writing. And if you're having trouble with that at this point, you need to go to the Writing Center and get some help while you have it accessible through your tuition. It's free right now, or it's paid for rather, through your tuition. So access that while you can. And then semantics are the meanings of words. So how prevalent are communication disorders? Well, about 1.5% of all school-age children, and almost 3% of children 3 to 5 are going to have some type of communication disorder. So there's a whole lot of this in our school population, especially our young children. And interestingly, as I said a moment ago, my oldest grandson, Wesley, has outgrown some of his speech issues, most of his speech issues. He still has some trouble with memory and remembering words, remembering units of language and things like that. So what is the cause of communication disorders? Well, there are a number of different causes. Some are congenital, and congenital means acquired during prenatal development. So while a baby is in utero, things can happen that will impact their communication later. Some are acquired, and that would be post-birth, after the child is born. So a traumatic brain injury could cause damage to the part of the brain that impacts language or articulation, and that could have an impact on the way a child communicates. It could be organic, and when we say organic, that means it could be inherited from one parent or another. Could be something that's of a genetic kind of nature. Or it could be functional, and that means it could be learned, it could be environmental, or it could be psychological. Now, I have another grandson who's not pictured in this photograph that I showed you at the beginning, who came into our family through the foster care system. And Liam was actually in a home originally. His birth home was one with a lot of drug use and a lot of physical and even some sexual abuse. And so Liam was treated very, very poorly before he came to us at the age of 3. And he did not talk for a long time after he came into our daughter's family. He and his older sister were badly abused. The thing that they told our kids when they got Liam and his older sister was that their parents were dealing drugs and used their home as kind of a hub of this drug business. And they would turn Liam's crib upside down and use it as like a cage for him in the home setting. And so he was very, very traumatized by a lot of the goings on in that home setting. And he was almost paralyzed when he began to try to speak. He would open his mouth, and you could tell he knew the word he wanted to say, and he would just like that. He would just stand there and try to say the word and not be able to utter a sound. And he's gone through a lot of counseling and a lot of speech and language therapy, and he's communicating better. And he's now 6, he's about to be 7 in April, but he's still not real fluid in his communication, and he's receiving special services in school. But that is certainly the last one of these causes. That's functional, learned, environmental, or psychological. I would say it's environmental and psychological. So how do we identify speech disorders? Well, we use standardized testing instruments. We use informal measures. We look at the family history. We use professional judgment, and always a speech language pathologist, or in the schools, we abbreviate that and we say an SLP. That stands for speech language pathologist. The SLP is the person who does all of that for us. They do the standardized testing. They do some informal measures with the student. They talk to them, they listen to them, they try to engage them in conversation. If the child is young, they'll do some play activities with them. They'll talk to the parents or perhaps the foster parents. They might interview the daycare teachers, or if the child is older, the teachers in the classroom. And then, of course, they're going to use their professional judgment to determine what's going on as far as the child's speech disorder is concerned. Now, we've got a special note here. The last bullet is identification of the linguistically diverse. Now, your book talks about this some. We've got to be careful when trying to identify individuals who are linguistically diverse as speech disordered, because, and your book talks about this some as well, a little bit in that first chapter and also in this chapter, about how there have been issues historically with over-identifying kids who don't speak English as having a communication disorder. And so we've got to be careful that we're parceling those two things out really well and saying it's not the language difference that's the problem, it's a language disability. And we've got to make sure that we assess kids in their native language so that we can tell if the problem is a language problem or a language difference. And so we've got to be sure we separate the two issues. Is it the diversity issue? Is it the difference of language, or is it a disability? And so we've got to make sure that we make that determination before we go down the path of doing a lot of testing. So we've got to be real careful with that. So who do we say should be tested when and how and why? A lot of people say, oh, my child needs to be tested. They're not saying their R's correctly. Well, there's a chart in your book. It's on page 207 of the second edition. I'm not sure exactly what page it's on in the third edition. You'll have to look, but it's right around there. And it tells you the age at which little kids should be saying each one of their letters. And I should know better, and because I've been doing this for a really long time. But I'll tell you, even people who are supposedly professionals at this make mistakes. And when my grandson Wesley was born, I didn't want to be called grandmother. Um, I didn't want to be called Nana or Mimi or any of those real grandmotherly names like you probably maybe call your grandmother. Um, my son teases me and calls me Mamaw because I think that one's one of the worst ones. You know, that makes you sound like you're really, really old. And so I didn't want to be any of those kinds of things. So I thought, well, okay, here's a good one. You know, my first name is Lisa. Um, I'll be called Lily, and Wesley and whoever comes after him can call me Lily. Well, I never even thought to look and see at what age the L sound develops in young children. Well, it's one of the last sounds to develop. You can look on that chart. And I think the L comes in around age 6. And so, what do you think most kids substitute for L? Well, Wesley substituted a W. And so when he started talking, he called me Wee Wee. And nobody really wants to be called Wee Wee as a grandmother. But, you know, it was pretty cute when he said it. But fortunately, he grew out of it. And now he does call me Lily. But for a long time, he did call me Wee Wee. And everybody got a big kick out of it with him going around saying Wee Wee instead of Lily. I kind of got my just desserts on that one. But um, we can't expect kids to develop all those sounds at the same time. It's the way the mouth and all the structure therein develops, and so those sounds come at varying times. So let's look at the next bullet and see what some of these articulation disorders actually are. An articulation disorder is when the sounds don't come out the way they're supposed to, and when they don't form at the times at which they're supposed to. So if you were to look at that chart and the child that you're thinking about isn't making the sounds that they should well past the time that they should have developed those sounds on the chart, then that's when we're supposed to start getting concerned. So a substitution is like many children do, like Wesley did, says wabbit for rabbit, you know, like Elmer Fudd in the cartoons. You know, that wascally wabbit is a substitution. An omission is when the child leaves out a sound. And so they say brown ache for brown rake. So they're just leaving out the R sound in both of those words. A distortion is like a lisp. They say thun instead of sun. So they're changing the sound. An addition is where they add a sound in. So black horse for black horse. They're adding that sound into the word. So those are the 4 different types of articulation disorders. So articulation is the first kind of communication disorder, and then there are those subtypes underneath it. Now, the next type of a communication disorder is a language disorder. And then under language disorders, we have 2 kinds. We've got receptive. That's what we take in, what we understand of what we've heard. And then there's expressive, the output. So the receptive is what we understand of what we're hearing, and expressive is how we communicate what we've taken in. So we go back to those terms that we learned earlier: phonology, morphology, semantics, etc. And this is how they are they're dealt with within the expressive language realm. So in the phonology realm, an expressive language disorder is when the child has difficulty with intelligibility. Maybe they have a hard time rhyming. They have a hard time blending. And so they're just not connecting those sound bits. They don't understand that cat and hat end with the same sound. They don't understand that if you say bull, bull, you're putting the B and the L together. Morphology and syntax are impacted when there's difficulty with those verb endings or tenses or plurals or grammar. Now, Wesley had problems with this. He would say, I runded very fast. He didn't connect with I ran, that irregular tense. And so he would say, I randed. Now, a lot of little kids do that early on, but then they catch on to those irregular verbs and they start making the change. And he didn't do that in a timely fashion. Now, semantics are impacted where you see that the child is having difficulty following directions, difficulty paraphrasing, using figurative language. They don't make those shifts with how to use the language once it goes in their heads. And then pragmatics are when we see difficulty expressing ideas or understanding what others are saying. So that's all on the expressive side of language disorders. Now, fluency is the next one. So far, we've got articulation. That's forming the words, the way they come out with the structure of the mouth. Then language, and now we've got fluency. Now, this is what a lot of people are really familiar with as far as language disorders go. This is the rate at which words flow. So this is where stuttering falls in. There's another type of fluency disorder called cluttering, and stuttering and cluttering are the two primary fluency disorders. And stuttering is what we know of that that irregularity of the rate of output when a person has a hard time with that flow of words kind of getting started. Usually cluttering is when a person can talk, but oftentimes they're talking fast and they're getting their words just almost on top of each other. And that's cluttering. Whereas stuttering is more of a slow paced. Cluttering is a faster disorder where the words are getting on top of each other and are jumbled. Both of those, though, are fluency disorders, having to do with the continuity, smoothness, rate, and effort of speech. Once they do get those words out, there's no problem with the actual word. It's not an articulation problem, it's a fluency issue. And then the last one is voice, and that's quality, pitch, and loudness are inappropriate for an individual's age, gender, cultural background, or geographic location. And I think of just a few examples of this. You all may remember the Little Rascals on television. And there was a character on there named Froggy who has a croaky kind of voice where the quality of that little boy's voice is inappropriate for his age. You may have known somebody who had maybe a very irregular, high-pitched voice. I met a young woman when I was on vacation a couple of summers ago, and she was working at a boat dock where I went for a boat ride. And as she greeted me, her voice was so high, I thought she's got to be faking this, you know. It was just like this. And I thought, nope, nobody's voice sounds like that. And I still don't know she sounded like a cartoon character. But she kept it up the whole time we talked to her. And so I don't know if she was, messing with us or if she really had a voice disorder and her voice was that high for some reason other than just her intentionally making it sound that way. Because we can control some of that ourselves if we choose to. It's not good for our voices, and we're going to talk about that here in just a second. There are some causes of that. There are some organic causes where it's physiological in nature. And then there are some functional issues where improper or ineffective use of the vocal mechanism is being intentionally, it's all being intentionally misused. So that takes us, first of all, do we have any questions about anything we've talked about so far about speech disorders? Okay, now this next, I've got two video clips that I just really like. These are not disorders, but they're communication issues that are very pronounced on college campuses these days. The first one you may have heard of, you may never have heard of it, but you have probably heard it, even if you haven't heard of it. And it's called upspeak. Upspeak is most common among young or youngish, younger women. I have heard it in men, but it's most common in young women. And it's just a quality in speaking of raising your voice at the end of your sentence. And a lot of young women do this. And it tends to sound like you don't know exactly what you're talking about. Do you hear what I'm doing with my voice? And every sentence sounds like a question. And that's called upspeak. And it's pretty common among the younger generations. And a lot of it happens with people like some people in media. A lot of young people in the media talk this way. The second one is vocal fry. And you may not have ever heard of vocal fry, but vocal fry is also very common among young women. It's down in the lower register of the voice, and it's it usually happens at the end of a sentence, and it's where the voice gets kind of like that. And it's very common among the Kardashians or people in that age group, and it gets kind of gravelly, and it's not good for your voice, but it's become very, very common amongst the younger generation. And so there are a couple of examples here that I think I have to, let's see, I think I have to hit that, wait. In order to make this, okay, let's see if this will show. Not sure if it will. No, we don't want
Those emotions, they were put on hold by time, by careers being built.
I can see it.
But at Claire's bridal weekend at a
I have a dream that my children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Come on, that's not the way Martin Luther King Jr. said it. And if he did say it that way, nobody's going to listen. Let's talk about uptalk.
Miss Calvin, we can't see the screen.
You can't?
Coach is here to help you
No, ma'am.
to lead your teams.
You can't see it?
No, ma'am, we can't.
Huh. Okay. It says okay. Hang on. Now can you see it? Now can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
With more excellence. And you're not going to be leading your teams to more excellence through uptalk. Uptalk is simply the sound of your voice going up at the end of a sentence or a thought instead of down where a period would be. This is a relatively controversial topic. On one side of the argument, people are saying, hey, uptalk is just a way to prevent someone from interrupting. If my tone goes up, it shows that I'm not done yet and I get to keep talking. Other people say it's invitational. It allows for that back and forth sound in a conversation. And others say, hey, it's just a way to check in, to sound a little bit more tentative, to see if people are following you. Now, on the other side of the argument, people say it's a bad habit that is hurting your credibility. One thing is certain, however, it is not gender specific. It's not something that only women do. There was a recent study by Reichart and Arvaniti that showed that even though women certainly do a little bit of uptalk, so do men. In either case, it creates mostly a bad impression. An Australian study showed that 85% of managers thought that it made their people sound insecure and unsure of themselves. So if it's hurting your personal credibility, it's something you want to look at. Now, the tips for this are really simple. First of all, are you an uptalker? Do some of your sentences go up at the end instead of down? You can ask a friend to listen if you can't tell, and as long as you're not a chronic uptalker, it's probably not that big of an issue. Now, if you do have an issue with this, the tip is really simple. Make your sentences a little bit shorter, and then make sure you come down at the end. It may take a little practice, but it's a worthwhile habit to break. I'd like to hear your tips, though, in the section below. What are your tips for breaking this uptalk habit, and what is your opinion on it a little more generally? Do you think it's a bad thing? Do you think it's no big deal? I'd love to hear your comments below. So thanks, God bless, and until next time, try not to use uptalk in your next conversation. Hopefully I can do this.
Okay, that's uptalk. You think you've heard uptalk before? Anybody? Okay, can you see the PowerPoint slide again? Okay. Here's the next one.
America's young women are...
Hang on.
America's young women are running out of oxygen. What else could explain why so many of them sound like this? What else could explain why so many of them sound like
Wait.
so cute?
Just kind of like my, motto. Kim and Chloe just don't get it.
Believe it or not, there's a scientific term for the way a Kardashian speaks.
Hang on another tab.
Vocal fry. It's a low, creaky vibration produced by a fluttering of the vocal cords. Speech pathologists call it a disorder that verges on vocal abuse, and here's what it looks like. Call it a quirk, a trend, or an epidemic. Vocal fry is everywhere.
I'm not staying here tonight. The only reason why I'm going is just to network.
A recent study of women in college found that 2/3 of them use this glottalization, which explains why the fry is a sizzling topic in the New York Times.
It's at the top of the page.
Sounds something like this. Even for an NPR host.
It's annoying. I mean, it's really annoying.
When I was a tween in the early 80s, the Valley Girl was born. She brought us like and uptalk. And there's been a general cultural agreement that that kind of speech leaves the user sounding airheady and unprofessional. But vocal fry is unique because researchers have found that women who talk this way are seen by their peers as educated, urban-oriented, and upwardly mobile.
You love him, and he totally complimented you.
Some linguists even suggest that creaky young ladies are evolving our culture as linguistic innovators.
Tyler has a pretty good reputation in this business.
Well, metaphorically, I encourage every woman to find her voice. I'm dismayed at how low it can go.
On my 16th birthday.
I'm burned out on the fry. It sounds underwhelmed and disengaged. It's annoying to listen to a young woman who sounds world-weary and exactly like her 14 best friends.
I'd love to hear your American accent because I'm always interested because I don't think we even have that. I guess in certain regions we have accents, but
Yeah.
but we do, obviously.
Well, it was late, so my American accent, like you heard on Terminator, kind of changed a little bit into Callie from the Valley.
The page, if you close the YouTube tab,
Now
does it
I had to
have
quit
the
that.
Whole like situation.
That's actually very good.
Thank you. Yeah, we had like a really good time. I got so close to like getting Jai to buy me like a $700 air conditioning unit. I like got the guy to help me. He was freaking out. It was awesome.
You know, if you
Okay.
Hello, everyone. I miss you.
Okay, I can't figure out how to
I
quit
wanted to do
that.
this video for a long time, and yesterday
You have 2 YouTube videos opened.
Okay, I gotta figure out how to quit that.
on Fresh Air with Terry Gross.
So whenever you go back to the webpage, just close out both of the YouTube links.
So I thought I would share with you
So
what some of the things that I've been noticing.
Okay. That,
Oh, well, yeah,
that fixed it.
it sounds like it.
I think I closed my PowerPoint too. Oh, and I think I stopped. Let's see, what else did I do? Oh dear. Okay, let's see. All right, I gotta make y'all smaller. Okay, there's my PowerPoint. But y'all can't see it now, can you? Can y'all see my PowerPoint?
No, ma'am, we can't.
Right now I got a screen share again. Okay, there we go. There we go. Now you can see it, can't you?
Yes.
Now. All right. So what are the instructional implications? Well, how is a student instructionally impacted by their communication disorders? Let's think about that for a second. Well, participating in a class discussion, communicating with their peers. Do you think that difficulty speaking is going to inhibit some kids? It does. It inhibits a lot of kids. And so their IEP team, their ARD committee is going to work together to come up with a plan that will help that child learn to communicate more appropriately, more successfully. And so you as the general education teacher or the special education teacher, or wherever you are in your career working with children who have difficulty communicating, are going to want to put some measures in place that help facilitate more successful communication. So you'll want to see what that IEP says. And it may say that you need to model appropriate communication. And of course, that's something we always want to do with students, with all children. We want to model appropriate communication. So speaking very plainly, clearly, appropriately to kids, to the children that have the difficulty, and to every other child in the classroom, so that that the student who has difficulty in communication can see a good example. We want to teach them self-talk so that they can practice hearing their own voice, practice with appropriate speech to themselves and then with others. We want to pair them with kids who have appropriate speech so that they can have those good models of what appropriate conversation and appropriate speech sounds like at all times. And so kids who have difficulty with speech should be sitting next to kids who are really good at language, oral language. And then we want to give them lots of opportunities to put appropriate speech into practice themselves. So by give them, oral fill in the blank. That's what the closed procedure is. It's kind of a fill in the blank with the right answer left out in different different opportunities for them to put the correct answer in the blank space, whether that's on paper or just in conversation, and give them lots of opportunities to self-correct, to model other kids, and to fill in the blank, if you will, with the right answer. We want to provide a language-rich instructional environment, lots of talking, lots of new words, lots of increasingly advanced words, lots of reading, lots of books, language perhaps that some of the kids haven't heard if you're working in a Title I school, where perhaps kids haven't had a lot of opportunities to go to the library or go to museums or the zoo or other places like that. You want to make the environment word rich and book rich, with as much of those language opportunities as possible. Now, for some kids who have language disorders, the ARD committee will want to give them additional assistance with communication with some sort of communication device. And if we're just helping them and augmenting or supplementing their communication, we call that augmentative communication. Maybe we're going to provide them with an iPad or some kind of other device that will help them with their communication. Other kids might be coming into your class who have more significant needs. Maybe they have no oral language at all, and they have perhaps they have a soundboard that they can, a communication board where they can touch different sounds to send communication, to communicate with the group with particular touches on words that mean, I'm ready for lunch, or I need to go to the bathroom, or is it my turn? Things like that. And that's what we call alternative communication, when that particular communication device is taking the place of oral communication. And so you may have students in your classroom using one or the other of these types of what we call instructional technology. But you'll have someone who is an expert in that area assisting you with whatever that type of technology is. And so that's what we've got tonight for communication disorders. Remember, there are 4 types. We've got articulation, language, fluency, and voice. And those are the 4 types of communication disorders. Articulation being issues that have to do with the structure of the way words are formed when there's a problem, just the output of the word. Language, when there's issues with the way words work together to make sentences. Fluency being the fluidity, the rate at which a child has output of language, like stuttering or cluttering. And then voice, when the pitch or timbre of a voice is not where we would typically expect it to be, and perhaps damage is being done. So those 4 different types of communication disorders is what we would find under the speech impairment category. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to open up I think the chapter 7 reflection is already open. This week we have our unit 2 application activity, which is finding a book that has to do with one of the disabilities that we've talked about, or if you want to reach further out into another disability that we're going to discuss later in the semester, you're welcome to do that. Find a book, a children's book, or a young adult, young reader's book that includes that disability. Give us a small synopsis of that, and you're going to have that as your application activity. And then I want you in the discussion board this week to just talk briefly about what your book is and discuss that with a couple of people. So that's our discussion board for this week. We add that along with your what you submit for your up to 2 pages on your application activity, and that's 15 points on the written portion and 10 points on your discussion, for a total of 25 points on your application activity for Unit 2. All 4 of these chapters that we've just done. Your test is coming up. And then next week, I think what we'll do, since we skipped last week, I think I'm going to roll chapters 8 and 9 together. 8 is about auditory impairments and 9 is about visual impairments. And so I think what we'll do is we'll just roll those 2 chapters into one evening. I'll talk about both next week, and we'll just do 1 question from 1 chapter and 1 question from the next chapter, for a total of 10 points on those 2 chapters. Okay, so you'll have to read both chapters next week, but just 1 question from each chapter. Okay, so I'll post an announcement about that so everybody understands that, but y'all get the heads up on that first. Okay, so chapters 8 and 9, just turn those in together, chapters 8 and 9 for next week. Okay, and we'll have a webinar next week about those 2 chapters, and we'll knock both of those out next week. Okay, any more questions? Okay, that discussion board is already open. Chapter 7, the reflection is already open. I'll open up the test on Saturday, and y'all have a great week. I'll see you next week, hopefully. All right, thanks for tuning in. Bye, folks.